Hi everyone, I'm Scot Landry, one of the co-leaders of Dynamic Parish, and it's a joy to present this webinar to you on Better Sunday, an invitation to take one step closer to God. I'm recording this webinar primarily for the parishes in New Orleans who are part of the Dynamic Parish Initiative, but I'm sure this presentation can be helpful to anybody wherever you are in terms of your involvement with Dynamic Parish. So Better Sunday, it comes with a few promises in terms of our presentation tonight. So I want to share with you the 60-second promotional video that we put together that highlights what those promises are, and then you can hold me accountable to whether I deliver on those promises during this webinar.
Life is a journey. It's good from time to time to pause and think about how the journey is going. Are you happy with how your life is progressing, or do you feel like something is just missing? Whether you feel like you're ready to take the next step, or are just trying to get back on track, God gives us an opportunity each week to reconnect with Him and His dreams for our lives. Do we make the most of that opportunity, or do we let it slip away? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we let that opportunity slip away more than we should. Better Sunday is an hour-long event that will help you develop one real, practical habit to make the most of the opportunities God gives you to live the life He dreams for you. Can a better Sunday truly lead to a better life? Come and see.
So it makes two promises. One, that it's an hour-long presentation, so hold me accountable for that in this webinar. And it also promises that we're going to expose you to one real practical habit to listen to the voice of God and to make the most of the opportunities God gives you to live the life He dreams for you. So please hold me accountable for that. It's a true joy to be working in Dynamic Parish with so many great pastors and implementation team chairs and implementation committees at the 5 parishes across New Orleans. Tonight, I want to invite you on the next step in our journey together by introducing you to one life-changing habit that you can use to become the best version of yourself, to fulfill that universal call to holiness that God has for each of us. And I'd like to begin our conversation about this life-changing habit with a question. Which voices do you listen to in your daily life? This question is so critical to living our best lives that Matthew Kelly often says, one holy moment at a time. And here's what I mean. Wilma Rudolph had a difficult start to her life. She was born prematurely. She suffered from a compromised immune system and contracted pneumonia, scarlet fever, and polio, all before the age of 4. While she survived, she lost so much strength in her left leg and foot that Wilma was unable to walk. The damage was so severe that doctors told Wilma and her mother that Wilma would likely never walk again without braces. The doctors, however, didn't quite know who they were dealing with. Wilma Rudolph was no ordinary 4-year-old. Day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, Wilma dedicated herself to the dream of walking again. The physical therapy regimen prescribed to her was incredibly demanding and painful. But Rudolph never quit. More than that, she poured every ounce of her mental and physical energy into the pursuit of her improbable dream. And it paid off. By age 12, she shed the braces, and she wasn't just walking. She was running. Pretty fast, too. In fact, she was the fastest in her school, and that included all the boys. But Rudolph wasn't ready to stop there. Instead, she had something bigger in mind. She went back to work. But this time, it wasn't just for physical therapy. This time, she started to train. After another 8 years of incredibly hard work and dedication, Rudolph wasn't just fast, she was Olympic fast. And at the 1960 Olympics in Rome, Wilma Rudolph set the record for the fastest times in Olympic history for the 100 meters and the 200-meter races. Of course, winning the gold medal in both events, making her called the fastest woman in the world. Not bad for a girl whose doctors told her that she would likely never walk again without braces. Years later, when asked how Wilma Rudolph was able to achieve the improbable, she simply said, "The doctors told me that I would never walk again, but my mother told me that I would, and I believed my mother." In each of our lives, we're often given the opportunity to choose whose voice we listen to. Will we listen to the voice that challenges us and encourages us to be our best? Or will we listen to other voices? In other words, will we listen to the ultimate voice of encouragement, the voice of God, or the voice of the world? Because the voice of the world can get pretty loud. In 1941, the writer C.S. Lewis wrote a series of newspaper columns which became the book The Screwtape Letters. In it, C.S. Lewis tells the story of the conversations between a senior devil and a junior devil. In one particular encounter, the junior devil was relating his plan for keeping people from God. The junior devil shared a number of big, complicated ideas and strategies. And then the senior devil said, "Whoa, slow down. All that I've given you so far, my plan is simpler. It's just to create enough noise in a person's life that he or she won't be able to hear the voice of God." Interesting. That was way back in 1941, almost 80 years ago. How much noise is in our lives now? Some voices are the same as 1941. We have newspapers, books, radio, television. But the noise has gotten much louder in our life. We just don't have 3 or 4 TV channels anymore. We have more than 500. We can watch TV on our phones in any place we want through YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, and many other streaming platforms. And then we have social media of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We can become overwhelmed with the voices of our culture. Even when we get beyond the noise, we can find that there are conflicting voices. So we face the decision of which of these voices we'll listen to. Will we listen to the voice that challenges us and encourages us to be our best, like Wilma Rudolph, or will we listen to other voices? Tonight I have a confession to make. In fact, it's 2 confessions. The first is that I'm really looking forward to this Sunday's Mass. And it's not just because it's Mother's Day. But get this. The Sunday Gospel reading this Sunday is only 62 words. I think it's the shortest Sunday Gospel reading of the year. Last Sunday, by reference, a regular Sunday Gospel, 531 words. And on Good Friday, perhaps one of our longest Gospel readings, that Passion account is 1,926 words. So 62 words, that's something to look forward to. But the second confession about this upcoming Sunday Gospel reading is a little bit more serious for me. It involves the actual content of the Gospel reading from St. John. In it, we're referred to by an unflattering name. I'm referred to that name, so are you. Jesus himself actually refers to us by that name. And the church to this day continually refers to us by this name. And the confession is, I've never really liked the name. Jesus calls us so many good names in the scriptures. We're called friends, disciples, and followers. Since then, others who might not be part of our community have called us by other names, like Christians or Catholics. Or in Mass, we're often referred to by the priests as brothers and sisters. But this weekend, Jesus calls us by the name of an animal that I've really never liked. He calls us sheep. I don't know about you, but when I think about sheep, I think of an animal that is dumb, slow, lethargic, and worst of all, smelly. Do any of us like being called by those adjectives? And not just by somebody we don't like. We're called that name, by the second person of the Blessed Trinity, no less. We have a God who loved us so much that he took on human flesh, suffered and died for us out of love, so that we can be saved and redeemed. He loved us that much. So then why did he often choose to use the metaphor of a sheep when describing us? The answer is also in this Sunday's gospel. Jesus says right at the beginning, "My sheep hear my voice." In that one little sentence that Jesus tells us about who he is and who we are in relation to him. Jesus is the good shepherd because he cares for us, protects us, and keeps us together. And as we learn in a parable elsewhere in the gospel, he's willing to leave a big crowd of us to go and search for the one of us who was lost and far from the community. So if Jesus is the good shepherd, we as sheep, why does he refer to us as sheep? Because we hear his voice. So a large part of tonight is about forming habits to listen to his voice more clearly, to sift through all the noise we hear in society. And if we can hear Jesus' voice, Jesus' direction for us individually as powerfully as possible, our lives will be better. And forming a habit to hear Jesus' voice is so much about what we're about at Dynamic Catholic. We try in everything we do to help Catholics form great spiritual habits. So that brings up the question that some of you may have 6 months into our Dynamic Parish initiative. What really is Dynamic Parish all about? And how did we end up at your parish? So in February of 2018, about 15 months ago, Matthew Kelly called me and he shared his initial dream for Dynamic Catholic was to help parishes. But he realized that we couldn't truly help parishes become dynamic without world-class resources for parishioners, particularly to engage Catholics who have drifted away from the faith or aren't very engaged in living their Catholic faith. Because we've always believed that God transforms parishes one at a time. So Matthew and the team at Dynamic Catholic invested its first decade developing the Catholic Moments series. Catholic moments are times in the life of faith when many of us are open to taking a fresh or a new look at all that the Catholic faith has to offer. The sacraments are part of this: baptism, first reconciliation and first communion, confirmation, marriage, death and dying. The seasons of Lent each year and Advent are critical. On a weekly basis, Sunday Mass is critical for the way we live our faith. And on a daily basis, a prayerful relationship with God of at least 10 minutes a day can take our life of faith up at least a level, maybe several levels, in terms of our intimate conversations with God. So the first decade of Dynamic Catholic was all about developing these Catholic moments that can help parishioners grow closer to God. This decade, Matthew indicated to me on that call, would be about parish renewal, taking all these programs for individual parishioners and doing them through the parish and learning from how the parish most effectively shares those resources with their parishioners. So Matthew told me beyond just launching a parish renewal initiative that he really hoped that this would be the largest and biggest parish renewal effort the church has ever seen. And he said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life and all the lives at Dynamic Catholic, people like Matthew who choose to work there, figuring out what truly works to renew parishes. And he said that he wanted to call it Dynamic Parish. And then he invited me to be one of the co-leaders of Dynamic Parish. And for someone who loves the church, who had worked in the church in various ways to support the church's mission for more than a dozen years full time, that I was offered the opportunity to co-lead it, and arguably the biggest initiative going on in the Catholic Church, was a true honor and privilege. I was serving as an interim principal a year ago, and I told Matthew my last day as the principal of St. Paul's Choir School up in Cambridge, Mass. would be on June 15th, and 3 days later, June 18th, I joined Dynamic Catholic and we officially launched the Dynamic Parish Initiative. So some of you might be wondering, what is the purpose of Dynamic Parish? It's it's bringing these resources that transform people to parish communities, and that God will transform parishes one person at a time. So you might be wondering why your parish was selected. So, and then what is Dynamic Parish? So first, how was your parish selected? We wanted to work with parishes in different parts of the country in our pilot, and we decided to work with dioceses in the Northeast. We chose Brooklyn. And then in the South, we chose New Orleans. In the Midwest, we're working in Detroit. And out West, we're working in Orange County, California. And how was New Orleans chosen? Well, as we asked for recommendations from people who know the Catholic Church throughout the United States, New Orleans was often suggested by people because of its long-lasting and beautiful Catholic faith life here. So we contacted Archbishop Aymon, asked if he would support us working with 5 parishes in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Thanks be to God, Archbishop Aymon enthusiastically said yes. He identified a priest of the Archdiocese who could help us identify about 10 parishes to meet with who met our criteria. And when we came to your parish, your pastor and other members of your team, after some conversation, agreed that they'd be willing to partner for the 5-year pilot, in the hope that it would help individual parishioners grow in faith, encourage more Catholics to become re-engaged in the faith and grow in their level of engagement, and then to help us, together with your parish, discover what really works to grow parishes, and then so that we could together share that good news of what will work in the year 2019-2020 with every parish across America. And we're so glad that your pastor and the leadership team said yes, and that Archbishop Aymon said yes, and we're so glad to be with you. So, what is Dynamic Parish? I'm going to give you 3 ways we describe it. The first is that it's a partnership. It's a partnership between your parish, 21 parishes in fact in the pilot, Dynamic Catholic, our organization, and God, our Heavenly Father, to discern what will truly renew all parishes today. We believe we'll find several common steps that work across every one of our 21 pilot parishes to help individual parishioners, entire parish communities, and the Church in America to become all that God desires it to be. Second way we describe it is it's the continuation of our mission at Dynamic Catholic to re-energize the Catholic Church in America, now one parish at a time. Does the Catholic Church need re-energization? Consider these sobering stats. Now more than 30 million Americans report themselves as former Catholics. That's more than the entire population of Canada. More than 70% of American Catholics don't attend church on Sunday, and only 1 in 6, or 17%, attend church every Sunday. We can certainly do better than that. In the last 20 years, we've closed more than 3,000 parishes and several hundred Catholic schools. While priestly vocations are rising, they're not rising quickly enough to keep up with the number of priests who are moving into senior priest status and less than full-time ministry. Because of that trend, 10 years from now, as many as 50% of American parishes won't have a resident priest. And when we interview individual Catholics, we recognize that engagement is a real issue. Surveys tell us that many Catholics say that the Church isn't speaking to the real issues of their lives that they face right now and meeting them where they're at. At Dynamic Catholic, we're proud to be one of many organizations doing everything possible to turn this tide, turn this trajectory, one individual and now one parish at a time. And we're so glad that your parish is partnering with us on that. And then my favorite way to describe Dynamic Parish is it's a search for true game changers in individuals' spiritual lives and the spiritual life of a parish. And what do I mean by game changer? Game changers are ideas or strategies or processes or sometimes people or sometimes products which can create a breakthrough and take an organization or a community to the next level. Often it's easy for us to see game changers when we look at new technology. For example, an iPhone. Think of the compilation of game changers here. Chips in these phones have the processing power that of several mainframe computers when they first came out. Email and texting allows you to get messages throughout the world. Anybody you can travel with your phone, and in most places in the world still take a phone call. AirPods, that you can wirely listen to what's on that phone without even a wire. Another game-changing technology. We can take video calls. We can watch TV streamed because of Wi-Fi on these phones. And for somebody like me who travels a lot, just the convenience of not having to find a printer in a hotel and print out my boarding pass before I get to the airport, that I can just get an electronic boarding pass, certainly saves me time and a lot of stress, and so on and so on. So you might think of a phone as a very complicated piece of technology, and that's certainly a true statement. But what was the real game changer that led from typical flip phone, cell phone technology to smartphones? It was that Apple primarily figured out a simple interface where we could touch things like apps, or we could scroll and we could slide just by moving our finger, that made it so easy to use that you didn't need to study computers to be able to get the most out of the iPhone. So that's why in so many ways it was a game changer. So the thing about most game changers is that they're simple. And they can seem obvious after the fact. And it's the simplicity of the game changer that makes implementation and broad adoption possible. And we're here tonight to share with you a simple game-changing spiritual habit. But before sharing that with you, let's talk about the habits in general. The habits can be powerful forces for good and bad. So we've titled this talk Better Sunday. We promised, as you heard in that promotional video, that we'll help you and we'll propose to you one real practical habit to make the most of the opportunities that God gives you to live the life He envisions for you. We all have routines in life. Routines are habits, or they're sequences of habits that we've done so often that we can accomplish those tasks without much thinking. For example, when you wake up, you likely have a routine. Do you start by brushing your teeth, or showering, or making the coffee, or going for a run, or checking email, or praying a morning offering? And I ask you, particularly on work days, where your routines might be stronger than on the weekend, do you do the same sequence almost every day? Or do you have to think about, what am I going to do first or second? Most of us have those routines in the morning, and once we roll out of bed, we do it in the same sequence each day, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Routines, for me, one way to think about it is that they allow our brains to go on autopilot. Our brains become wired to complete these regular tasks in order to save our mental energy for the other things that'll come up throughout the day. Hundreds of habits shape our days, guiding how we get dressed in the morning, speak to our kids, fall asleep at night, determine what we eat for breakfast, how do we get things done at work, and whether after work we exercise or perhaps have a beer. Each habit has a different cue, a different set of actions, and a different reward. Some habits can be simple, others are complex, but it's important to know that every habit is changeable. Good habits can lead to good outcomes. Bad habits can do the opposite. And as I've learned a lot more about habits in preparation for sharing this Better Sunday event with you, I've learned that not every habit is equal in power. In his book, The Power of Habits, Charles Duhigg identifies these things that I like to think of as super habits, or what Duhigg calls keystone habits. Keystone habits are habits that can influence or supersede other habits. For example, one of my favorite examples in the book of what a keystone habit is, Duhigg suggests that if you want to lose weight, a simple, powerful keystone habit of utilizing a food journal and writing down every single thing that you eat can begin to make you eat healthier and then eat less and then lose weight without signing up for an expensive weight loss program or totally changing your diet. just writing down the stuff. So how that works is you might have an intention to just eat healthier, but the cue of feeling hungry, that trigger, and then the routine now of having to write down what you eat before you eat it, makes you really think if you need that bag of Doritos, or need that third helping of the pasta, or need that second scoop of ice cream. Thinking about it and writing it down prompts you to reconsider and often just start to make a better choice. And the feeling you have from making that good choice gives your brain a reward, which makes it easier each time you repeat that loop. And if you really want to turbocharge this food journal routine, you can add a habit of accountability, where once or twice a week you share your meal journal with someone else, and you're accountable for how many times you write down that sugary snack, and explain it to somebody who has your best interest in mind. So food journals can be a very important keystone habit that can help you lose weight and to become healthier. Habits aren't destiny. What you need to do to change a habit is two things. One, first you have to believe that change is possible. Might seem like a simple statement, but not everybody who is listening to this presentation, certainly a lot of people across the country don't often believe change is possible. So you need to believe it's possible, and then you need to decide on new actions once you might feel hungry, and then there has to be a clear reward at the end. So for example, if you were practicing the food journal at 8:30 p.m., if you typically get hungry for a snack, and your typical set of actions are to get up from where you're sitting and then to walk in the kitchen toward the pantry where the chips or the cookies are. But if you strategically put a bowl of apples or oranges on the kitchen island on the way to your pantry, just seeing that and then picking up the apple and biting it, it's a new series of actions. And the reward that you can get isn't just the taste of the apple, but it's the sense that you're making a better choice. So that's how you change habits. You believe that the change is possible. You replace the actions after the cue with new actions, and there needs to be that intentional reward at the end. So now let's talk about our habits as Catholics, and particularly our habits at Mass. And I'd like to just focus on 4 habits. First is, what are our habits when we first arrive at church? Do we always try to park in the same spot? Or do we sometimes get annoyed when somebody steals, quote unquote, our spot? Do we enter the same door? When we enter church, do we do the same things first? Do we bless ourselves with the holy water? Or do we get a bulletin first? Or do we greet people around us first? Or do we wait to do anything until we genuflect and make a prayer to God? Or do we do something else? My question for you is, what is the sequence of activities you go through? And how long have you been going through that sequence of activities? And then I'd ask you to reflect the next time you come to church. Is it possible that your routine when you first get to church is so strong that it's on autopilot, that you haven't been thinking about it? And then next habit, what do we do during the hymns? Some of us, when the hymn is called, pick up the hymnal, stand up, and then sing as loudly as we can. Others of us pick up the hymnal and then fake it. We might lip sync the words. For whatever reason, we don't want to sing that loud, but we don't want everybody else to know it. Some of us are just beyond faking. We'll stand up like everybody else, but we won't make an effort to sing, and we're okay with that. Every church that I've been in, there are different habits when it comes to singing. So what do you do during the hymns? And how often have you been doing those habits? And I ask you, is it possible that after many years, your routine for what you do during the hymns is on autopilot? We all have habits during the scripture readings. Some of us follow along with the scriptures by reading the missalette. Some of us use a resource that we bring with us, like the Magnificat or the Word Among Us. Or maybe we follow the readings through an app on our smartphone. Some of us will listen with our eyes on the lector. Some of us will listen with our eyes closed, imagining ourselves in the stories being told. Some of us might choose to meditate on an image or a symbol in church, like a crucifix or one of the stained glass windows or one of the stations of the cross or one of the statues that we might have in our church. So I'd like to ask you, what habits do you have during the scripture readings? And how often have you had those habits, and for how long have you had those habits? And just when you come to church next, that you would ask yourself the question, is it possible that your habits in this area are on autopilot? And then lastly, I ask you to consider your habits and your routine when you receive Jesus in the Eucharist. Some of us will receive on our tongues. Some of us will receive on our hands. When we show honor to who we're receiving, some of us will genuflect before we receive communion. Others will do a reverent bow. But what we do can often be based on the instruction of others. One of my favorite things as an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist at my parish is to be asked to distribute communion on the day after First Communion. So you'll get these great young, very cute 8-year-old second graders come up for their second communion, and to see the joy on their face. In my parish, most of those second graders receive on their hands. They hold their hands high. They have a great big smile, fully aware that they're receiving Jesus. And it's such a joy to be able to give Jesus to them. And then sometimes I've had the experience of a couple months later, the same cute second graders, now getting ready over the summer to enter third grade, come up, and you can't see their hands anymore. But you're not quite sure because they're small. Have they received communion? But you go through a process of elimination as an extraordinary minister. They don't have their hands crossed, so they're not looking for a blessing. Their mouth isn't open, so they're not looking to receive Jesus on their tongue. But you can't see their hands, and then you look down, and it's right down below, below their waist, really close to them. They don't have their hands up. So you'll give Jesus to them there, sometimes bending down really low in a way that'll hurt your back. And often I've wondered, it's not the right time to encourage them to have their hands up. But if somebody doesn't help them form a new habit earlier on, for how long will they be receiving Jesus that way? So our habits can be formed very early on. When I think about receiving the Eucharist and how, some of our habits in Mass can be formed many years ago, I think of something my twin brother, Roger, preached on his first Mass. He's actually my identical twin. I like to think of him as the best looking priest in America, perhaps of all time. And maybe your pastor and your priest moms would beg to differ with my mom, but bald is in, I like to say. So that's a picture of Roger here. At Roger's first Mass in June of 1999, he shared a quote from Mother Teresa, which he said was very much on his mind that day. As a deacon and then a young priest in Rome, he often went to the Masses and then eventually celebrated the Masses for the missionaries of charity community there. And they would always have a message painted on the wall or put in a photo, a picture frame on the wall. And the quote from Mother Teresa was this: "Father, pray this Mass as if it was your first Mass, your last Mass, and your only Mass." And Roger shared in his reflections on that first Mass that he prayed that the celebration of Mass for him as a priest would always be new, always be powerful, and never routine. He did not want the celebration of Mass to go on autopilot. So I've consistently reflected on that from time to time. Do I receive communion at Mass as if it was my first communion, my last communion, or the only communion I would ever receive? Or do I listen to God's word in Scripture as if it's my first time hearing it, my last time hearing it, or the only time I would ever hear it? And if we approach it with that sort of mentality, it'll never go on autopilot, never be routine. But the reality is, as cradle Catholics, I've certainly seen this in my own life, if you're a cradle Catholic too, and you've gotten to be to a mature age, we've all attended thousands of Masses. If you've been a daily communicant for many years, you perhaps have surpassed 10,000 Masses that you've participated in your life. And it's easy because of that frequency for our Mass habits to be turned into routines and put on autopilot. So tonight I'm asking you to assess all your Mass habits, to determine whether you think that they're on autopilot, and then to intentionally choose habits that'll help you grow closer to God and to become the person that God has created you to be, the very best version of yourself. And tonight, I'd like to ask you if there was one simple habit that could change your experience of Mass, in which you could hear God's voice more regularly and clearly, help you gain insight and inspiration for the week, and help you grow closer as a community of faith with everybody that's praying with you at Mass. Would you give it a try? What if I also told you it was a keystone habit, and by adopting it, it would better all of your routines and habits, not only in Mass, but in the rest of your life? Would you be willing to give that habit a try, even for just a short period of time? And that's the type of short habit we're about to share with you, and that we believe at Dynamic Catholic can be a true game changer. But in all frankness, we're open to the possibility that it could be one of the biggest game changers in everything we do as part of Dynamic Parish, or that it might not be. The adventure, the excitement for us is seeing if it works. And the only way we're going to know if this is a true game changer is by your parish and the other pilot parishes trying it. We know that this habit, because of many testimonials we've received, has really worked to help individuals take their faith life to the next level and families to take their faith life to the next level. But we've never implemented it in a parish the way that we're going to ask your parish to implement it. And we want to see what happens when an entire parish community or a large part of the parish community embraces this habit. We're asking folks to just try it for a short period of time, essentially 30 days. If you're listening to this before Mother's Day weekend, we're essentially asking that people try this habit from Mother's Day to Father's Day. It will only take about 2 minutes each Sunday, so it's not a big ask in terms of time. It's a small ask in terms of time, but it's a big ask in terms of intentionality. We want those 2 minutes to be powerful. And if now when I give this presentation live in parishes, they hand out this thing that is going to be the habit, and it's the habit of a Mass journal. So when you receive your Mass journal, and Mass journals will be available in all of the 21 parishes, typically in the vestibule, so please pick one up the next time you go to Mass. I invite you to open the cover with a pen and write your name and initials, name or initials, on the inside cover, and put today's date, or you might just want to put the month and the year. You'll see that the Mass Journal is a small book. It only has about 125 pages. It can easily fit in your back pocket, or if you wear a coat, if you're a man, it can fit on the inside pocket. The bulk of the book is 2 pages for each of the 52 Sundays of the year. Kind of looks like this. You'll see numbers 1 to 52. It can be started at any point. It doesn't match up with the Sundays of Ordinary Time or whatever. So the first time you use it, just start on the 2 pages that have for week 1 on there. On the left side, when you open the book, you'll see a quote from either Rediscover Catholicism or Rediscover Jesus. And on the right side of each one of those pairs is a series of blank lines to just write some notes. And it says in big letters in many places in the book, and also on the back cover, a prayer. And we encourage you to pray this in a minute before Mass. It actually doesn't take a minute to pray, but budget a minute. And that prayer is, God, show me one way in this Mass I can become a better version of myself this week. It doesn't say, by the way, God, show me one way in this Mass my spouse can become a better version of himself or herself this week. Or it doesn't say, God, show me one way in this Mass my children or my parents can become better versions of themselves this week. We encourage you to give a Mass journal to your spouse and to your children or your parents, and encourage them to pray this prayer, and then let God speak to them in a way that is very specific to them. So how does the Mass Journal work? As I mentioned, you walk into church next Sunday. When you get typically into the pew, ask God from the quiet of your heart, God, show me one way in this Mass that I can become a better version of myself this week. And then listen. A critical component to any successful relationship that is often missing in many of our spiritual lives is listening. You know, we learn a lot of prayers as kids that involve us speaking. But the most powerful prayer involves that we listen after we pray and we talk to God in some way. So when you've made that prayer, God, please show me one way in this Mass I can become a better version of myself this week. Or if you personalize that, God, show me one way in this Mass, fill in the blank. Whatever's, the biggest thing on your mind as you approach that Sunday. Then you just listen to what God is saying to you in the scripture readings, in the homily by the priest or deacon, in the hymns, the hymn lyrics, in the prayers of the Mass, the Eucharistic prayer, and like the opening and closing prayer, in the witness of people around you in the community. But it's really important that you embrace the silent moments of Mass and listen to what God is saying in the quiet of your heart during those times. So you've spent time listening. Once you hear a message that seems that it's the message you needed to hear, write it down in your new Mass journal. And then we encourage you, it only takes 15, 20 seconds each day. Open your Mass journal during the week and just reflect on that one word or that one sentence that came to you powerfully on Sunday, so that you can keep listening throughout the week for how God reveals more and more about that message for you throughout the week. And then you just bring your Mass journal the next week and you repeat the process. You ask God through that prayer, God, please show me one way this week in this Mass that I can become a better version of myself this week. And then when you hear it, you write it down, and then you take that prayer with you, throughout the rest of the week, reflecting on that one word or message. What Matthew Kelly loves most about the Mass Journal, and he's been doing it for more than a decade, is that it subtly tracks our progress over time. If you're faithful to the process, you save all your Mass journals. And if you want to see how you've progressed in your spiritual life and in your relationship with God, or you want an answer to a similar issue or something you're dealing with that you dealt with a few years ago, you can go back to the Mass Journal and you can see the way God talked to you many years ago when you were facing a similar thing. We believe the Mass Journal can change your whole experience of the Mass, your relationship with God, and your appreciation for the Church. The one habit can make you a better version of yourself, can help make you a more engaged and contributing member of your parish community, and can reinvigorate your relationships. It's a powerful and practical tool to awaken a hunger for continuous learning. If God says to you, learn more about this, or there is an answer to that question, talk to somebody and ask for them to recommend a resource to you, perhaps. It can unleash a willingness to listen to God's voice more and more in our life. And we speak a lot about it, Dynamic Catholic. Matthew Kelly writes about this a lot. Our lives change when our habits change. Adding the new habit of the Mass Journal, 2 minutes on your Sunday, might just change your life. Now let's take it a step further. Imagine if every person in your parish came to church each Sunday with a Mass Journal, looking for the one way they could become a better version of themselves in the coming week. Think about the conversations that you'd have with your spouse, your children, your friends in the parish, your priests. A single habit like this, which is simple, it's practical, and it's powerful, it could transform the entire parish, one person at a time. We believe that God is always speaking to us through people and events, through the scriptures and the church. But each Sunday we have perhaps our most intimate encounter with God in the Mass, particularly when we receive Him in the Eucharist. Perhaps more than any place else, God wants to speak to us at Mass. And just think about it for a moment. If you knew that your Creator, the most powerful and loving God, was going to have a unique message for you at a meeting, at an encounter with him, would you want to make sure you would never forget it? Would you bring pen and paper and would you write it down? And if it's a truly powerful message for you, wouldn't you want to reflect on it and share it with those whom you love? So that's the simplicity, that's the power of the Mass Journal. Please bring your Mass Journal to Mass and encourage others to do the same. So we spoke a little bit earlier that this Mass Journal has powerfully helped individual Catholics grow in their faith. It's also helped so many families. Let's hear from one of those families now, the Hudsons.
I don't know that back then I would have thought something was missing. We were just going through the motions. And we were happy going through the motions. We just didn't know how much more there was. We have 3 kids, Maggie, Danny, and Nick. I think a lot of times with kids, we teach them to listen to their teachers and to listen to their coaches and to listen to other authority figures. But along the lines, we somehow forgot to teach them to listen to the voice of God. I think probably Maggie going through confirmation was about the time we thought, wow, this isn't going the way we thought it would go.
We didn't have enough discussion with her to know that she was struggling with her faith.
You see so many kids that are just ready to kind of duck out. We saw that with Maggie. That how could our daughter be questioning her religion and we didn't even know it? And what is it that is going to keep her here? What is it that's going to open the doors for her? And we certainly weren't doing it because we didn't know how. We have to figure out how to be more engaged. So we started using the Mass Journals. It changed the way we share the genius of our faith.
Such a simple thing to do. Actively listen to the priest as he's celebrating the Mass. When you hear something that you feel is God speaking to you, write it down. And take that and try and implement it throughout the rest of the week until the next time in Mass.
The books took on this whole new life that we never expected when we first started this journey with the kids.
I mean, from the first moment we walked in to Mass, I knew my engagement level was completely different. And it was really nice to see that with the kids as well.
They were looking forward to going to Mass and hearing what it was that God had to say specifically to them. So we kind of got into the habit of, when we'd leave Mass, in the car on the way home, we'd say, what did you write in your book? And everybody had something completely different that they had picked up during Mass that maybe we never heard, but somebody else did, and that was their message that day. I never thought we would be the kind of people to evangelize, but what I realized was we're doing that with our kids on the way home because we're talking about it, and there we were evangelizing and not even realizing we were doing it because we were just simply sharing the genius of our faith.
My prayer is that your family, if you embrace the Mass Journal, will share a similar experience that the Hudson family did. Now I'd like to move next to somebody who's a hero of mine, somebody who I think is a game changer as a person, and I think you'll agree with me after I share the story. And this person became a game-changing person because he added a new habit. So he was born in May of 1963 in a Catholic family in Minnesota, likely not very different from many of our upbringings. His upbringing was clearly ordinary. He went to public schools. In high school, he became the quarterback of his school's football team. In his junior year, maybe less ordinary, he was able to lead his football team to the state championship. He also had roles in the school plays, and he did all kinds of activities. He was a leader. Everybody knew him and loved him. Like many boys his age, Tom had dreams of playing football in college and then the pros, but early in his college career, he got hurt, so his goals changed. He transferred home to the University of Minnesota. He graduated. Later, he earned an MBA. He got married. He and his wife had 3 kids together. And by the time he's in his 40s, Tom became the CFO of his company. He mentioned to his friends that he lived his dream life in his dream house. He lived so close to the office that he was often able to have this routine where he went home for lunch with his wife as early and as often as possible. He loved to fish, and he had many great friends. But there was a restlessness in Tom's life, and he wasn't sure where it was coming from. Like so many other things in his life, Tom wanted to figure it out. So in 1999, he changed his midday routine. He stopped returning home for lunch. His wife, Dina, at first thought it had something to do with just being very busy at work, a busy season. But after a while, she just came out and asked him, "Tom, what are you doing now at lunchtime? You never come home and have lunch with me anymore." Tom responded with an answer that surprised Dina. He said, "Honey, I've started going to Mass." This really surprised his wife. She wanted to know what was so wrong in Tom's life that he needed to go to Mass, not just on Sundays, but nearly every day of the week. So Tom shared with her for a long time in his life he felt a bit of unrest, and something just seemed to be missing. He felt like he was meant to be someone or do something more important. Put more simply, he felt this sense that he was more than who he had become. So when he reached this point of dissatisfaction in life, Tom turned to God to see if God might be able to provide help and guidance. At Mass each day, he started asking God, "What am I here for? What's my purpose? What matters most in life?" And he shared these questions with Dina, and she started praying them too. It was then that things started to happen for both of them. Even though God wasn't making it exactly clear as to what their life's mission was, they both started getting better as people. The daily prayer started helping their marriage, and they started getting answers to some of these questions. Tom became a better father, husband, and leader, he told his friends. Dina told her friends she was becoming a better wife, a better mother, and that together she and Tom just kept growing as a couple, getting better and better and better. Dina said to her friends it was just beautiful how much positive change since they made that decision that Tom would go to daily Mass and they would pray together each day. But they kept coming back to that central question, God, what do you want us to do with our lives? Well, God finally answered that question on September the 11th, 2001. Flying back to California from Newark, New Jersey, on that infamous morning, Tom's flight, United Flight 93, was hijacked. From the back of the plane, Tom called his wife Dina 4 times. First call was at 9:27 a.m. Eastern Time. Tom told Dina that there were hijackers and a bomb on board. He asked her to call 911, which she did. On Tom's second call 7 minutes later, Dina told him that terrorists were hijacking planes up and down the East Coast, and that 2 hijacked planes had hit the towers of the World Trade Center. On Tom's third call at 9:45 a.m., Dina told Tom that another plane had just hit the Pentagon. And on the fourth call at 9:54, Dina tried to give Tom advice. As a former Delta flight attendant, Dina had received all types of training for situations like this and thought she knew exactly the right words to say. She told Tom to be quiet, to sit still, and to not draw any attention to himself. But Tom knew he had to do something. He told Dina, if they're going to crash the plane, we're going to have to do something, us on board. Dina said, well, what about the authorities? And Tom said, I don't think we can wait for the authorities, and I'm not sure what they'd do anyway. We feel like it's up to us, and we think we can do it. Dina asked Tom what he wanted her to do, and he just asked her to pray for him. Dina waited. She told Tom how much she loved him. And then Tom, trying to console her, don't worry, Dina, we're going to do something. And he hung up, and that's the last time they ever spoke. Soon after, Tom and at least 3 other guys on Flight 93 rolled into action. If you listen to the recording from the cockpit, you can actually hear Tom calling out orders and helping orchestrate that heroic effort. On September 11th, that suicide mission, which could have killed countless more people and perhaps taken out the White House or the U.S. Capitol building, if not for the heroism of Tom Burnett and the other folks on that flight. As you can see here, this is a photo of Shanksville in the days after the crash of United Flight 93. There and so many places across the country, memorials came and were planted for Tom and the other victims of United Flight 93. Tom's last day on this earth was September 11th, 2001. And it's interesting to think, how did God prepare him exactly for that moment? Most of us will never face the type of decision that Tom Burnett and others had on that morning of September the 11th on United Flight 93. But as somebody who had been attending daily Mass and praying with all his heart, we can only imagine what Tom's prayers were like on that plane. We can assume he prayed for his wife, his 3 daughters, his friends, his family. He probably prayed for the courage, if he needed to lay down his life for others and for the sake of his country. We can wonder, how clearly did Tom hear God's voice in those noisy and confusing moments on that plane? Truth is, we're not sure, but we can step back and be amazed at how prepared and how lucid Tom was at that moment. We can think that the moment God created Tom for was that very moment, and Tom presented his best self with remarkable courage. So what does that mean for us? Why do we share this story? First, it shows us the power of letting the voice of God take deep root in our heart, guiding us day by day, telling us what he wants for our lives. When we take time to listen to the voice of God, we learn answers, or at least we get guidance on life's biggest questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What matters most and what matters least? We can learn from Tom that it's never too late to discover the ability to hear God in our lives. Not only does God speak to each of us, but he speaks to each of us throughout our entire lives. The second thing that Tom's story highlights for me is the significance and the power of the Mass. Tom Burnett didn't just go to any old place to hear the voice of God in his life. He went directly to the source. He went to Mass. He received the Eucharist. Matthew Kelly often says that our lives change when our habits change, and that was certainly true for Tom Burnett. Tom's life changed when he changed his midday routine and started a daily habit of attending Mass at his lunch hour. That led to a habit of daily prayer for Tom and his wife Dina. And that daily prayer, I believe, led to the confidence and courage that on Tom's final day on this earth, he had his very best day. He was his very best version of himself, to have that courage and conviction that he needed to do something on that plane, to lay down his life, to save so many others, and to save important institutions in our country. So now, as I wrap up, I'd like to summarize some of the key points that we've shared today. We're asking you to try this Mass Journal for 30 days. If you're listening to this before Mother's Day, we ask you to try it in your parish from Mother's Day to Father's Day, and then to share with your pastor and members of the Dynamic Parish implementation team there what you think. We hope that it'll help you, and enough people in the parish will say that it's helping them that your pastor will want to continue it indefinitely. We're happy at Dynamic Catholic to provide Mass Journals in as many pens as you would want for the entire duration of our 5-year pilot study. So we're asking you to bring the Mass Journal with you and say that prayer as you get to church. Please show me one way in this Mass I can become a better version of myself this week. And again, you can modify the prayer. You could say something as you head in for Mother's Day. Please show me one way in this Mass I can appreciate something that my mom did for me that I've never expressed gratitude for. Or if you're going in for an important medical test this week, you could say, God, please show me one way in this Mass I can have less anxiety and prepare for the meeting, for the test that I'm going to have this week. Next is that God created us to become the best version of ourselves. When we live that out, it's noticeable, it's universally attractive, it's the best way to evangelize people, to just live our lives in a way where people say, I want a little bit of what that person has. And we believe we can become the best version of ourselves by listening to the voice of God more, and the Mass Journal is certainly a great tool to allow us to listen to God's voice. We think we called this Better Sunday because we believe a Sunday is to our week what breakfast is to our day. It sets the tone, and by having a good Sunday, by hearing God's voice in Mass and letting that propel us for the rest of the Sunday and then into the week, that will have not only a better Sunday, but a better week. We think that the Mass is central to listen to God's voice. Throughout time, the Church has always called the Mass the source and summit of our life as Christians. We flow from Mass, but it's also the high point of our Mass, because in a very intimate way we receive God into our very being when we receive the Eucharist. So if God promises that He'll always be with us and that we as sheep will always hear His voice, it makes sense that He'll speak to us as powerfully as ever in the Mass. But as we talked in the middle part of this talk, our experience of the Mass is directly tied to our habits. And I asked you to think about what were your habits at 4 key moments during the Mass, and to ask yourself 2 things. Are my habits on autopilot? And then secondly, are those the best habits that I can have to grow closer to God and to hear His voice? So please reflect on that the next few times you come to Mass. One of our favorite things, and if there's one line that I hope you remember from this presentation, is our lives change when our habits change. So just the adoption of a new habit, the Mass Journal, 2 minutes during Sunday Mass, that introduction of that keystone habit can change everything. We think that the Mass Journal is a game changer, that keystone habit that Charles Duhigg talked about. Finally, if you participated in our Best Lent Ever program, you heard a lot from Matthew Kelly about creating moments, holy moments. And I propose to you that helping others learn about the Mass Journal is an opportunity for a holy moment. So for example, if you're one of the first in your parish that is practicing the Mass Journal, you're going to have some curious people around you. What is that person doing with that little white book? They have that pen. What are they writing in there? That's just really interesting. So they might turn to you and say, what are you writing in that book? And then you can just explain to them, well, this is the Mass Journal that was talked about at the Better Sunday event, and that is available to us through our partnership with Dynamic Catholic. Hold on a moment, and then you go to where the Mass Journals are kept in the back of the church or the vestibule. You pick one up for them with a pen, and then you bring it back, and you can open to the first few pages and say, everything you need to know about the Mass Journal is here in the first couple pages. We just listened for one special thing one message that God has for us in this Mass. And it's made a difference in my life. I encourage you to do it. Just that extra step, that you're not just pointing them to where they can get the Mass Journals, but you're going to get them for them, and you're personally giving it to them, is a wonderful opportunity for a holy moment. So I conclude this presentation. Will you try the Mass Journal for 30 days? And then share your feedback with the Mass Journal with your parish implementation team and your pastor. We hope that the Mass Journal will be a game changer in your life, and then perhaps, if you're willing, that we can share with other people in other parishes down the road a similar story as we heard from the Hudsons. May God bless you, may God bless your family, and God bless your parish.